Welcome to Weird Web Radio, an explorer's guide to hidden worlds of the paranormal and occult, reality-expanding experiences, and the downright weird and bizarre. With your host, Lonnie Scott.
Welcome to Weird Web Radio. I'm your host, Lonnie Scott, and this episode features a very special guest. Her name is Kim Huggens. If you haven't heard of Kim before, then you probably don't read tarot and you probably don't know much about necromancy. And if you're in both of those camps, then you're in for a great surprise. I first met Kim in person at the Tarot Conference in Dallas, Texas in 2014, where she was a presenter. She read an impromptu little fun game in the hallway we had a lot of fun with, and she's the first person that ever told me, it's okay to grab a deck of tarot cards, throw them in the air, and then read them as they fall. That was a really fun exercise, and Kim and I hit it off right away. She's kind of one of my kindred spirits and one of my favorite people out there in the world. You're going to get a real treat here. We're going to cover everything from dealing with the loss of a loved one and how that affects your spirituality, to necromancy and the roots it has all the way back to the Greek magical papyri and what you can do about that today. Even what it is like for Kim being a girl in Wales practicing Vodou. And if you're interested in any of that and all the things that we're going to cover in between, you're in for a great show. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, grab your favorite drink, make some popcorn, and enjoy the show. Hi, Kim. Thank you for being here, and welcome to Weird Web Radio.
It's really good to be here. Thank you for having me.
I'm really excited to have you here.
So am I.
Yeah, as we covered before I pushed the record button, it's really cool to have someone here that I actually know to a degree in real life and consider a friend. For listeners out there who may not know, I met Kim in person at the Tarot Conference in Dallas, Texas back in 2014. I had been on the road driving for about 13 hours. I had just gotten into the hotel, checked in, gone to my room. I knew everyone was sitting downstairs because I recognized Marcus, Marcus Katz and everyone sitting at the table. And when I came and sat down, I sat directly across from you. And Marcus says, "Do you know Kim?" And I said, I know who she is, but I don't know her. And your first thing was, "Do you play Call of Cthulhu?"
Yes. Yeah, I've got a pretty one-track mind sometimes.
Yeah. I think you may have said hi or how are you, but I know the first thing out of your mouth that really had any importance was, "Do you play Call of Cthulhu?"
Yeah, I don't believe in small talk, go straight to what you care about.
Yeah, I can get into that.
Yeah.
And it turns out I never played. So
yeah,
there's that.
Disappointed.
So, Kim, where in the world are you?
I'm in Cardiff, Wales, which is part of the UK.
Okay. I've always wanted to go to Wales. Are you from Wales originally or relocated there?
Yeah, I relocated. I was actually born in Cambridge, which is East Anglia in the UK. Then my family moved to Bournemouth, right down the south of England. Where I grew up, you could actually see the Isle of Wight over the sea from the nearest beach to my house, which is about 5 minutes away. So it was a beautiful place to be. And then when I was 18, I came to Cardiff for my university studies and never left. It's a really lovely part of the world. It's beautiful. It's green. There's so much here. Cardiff's basically like London, but more compact and with less pollution. So it's really nice.
More compact with less pollution.
Yeah, definitely.
They should put that on the sign as you enter town.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Well, you have what I would call quite a diverse life in paganism and the occult. You've been a part of a lot of different areas, but it all had to kind of kick off and start somewhere. So how and why did you get started?
I actually don't really remember. The first thing I think that got me into that kind of thing was tarot. I was very, very young. I think I was 9 years old, and I had some pocket money my mum had given me. And we were traveling somewhere for a family holiday. And I remember going to a service station and just wanting to buy a book with my pocket money, anything that I could find. And this book Fortune Telling with Tarot Cards by Stuart Kaplan was there for sale, 99p. And that was pretty much what my pocket money was. So I just thought, oh, that looks interesting. And I bought it. And I spent most of that holiday reading it and making tarot cards out of bits of paper that I wrote and drew on. And from there, I started studying it more in depth. By the time I was 13, I think I was studying runes as well. And from that came a love of mythology, of folklore, of alternative religion. And I think I ended up stumbling into Wicca, witchcraft, paganism when I was about the same age, about 14. And it started out online. Back then, it was like the dawn of the internet for most of us. You know, it was the first time the internet had been made available in public schools, in homes. So I spent most of my lunch hours just on various chat rooms, downloading stuff from the internet, looking up really rubbish information in most cases, dabbling really as much as I could. And I think it was only when I was about 17 that I started getting into it really seriously. And I read everything I could. I would borrow books from libraries. I'd buy books with money I made from my part-time job. And then when I came to Cardiff for uni, I joined the University Pagan Society and got involved in lots of pagan events, in open rituals. They'd held various workshops, lectures, things like that. And it all went from there. Really dull, really. There wasn't a moment where I thought, wow, this is for me, this has changed my life. There wasn't, that conversion moment some people speak of. It was very much a gradual, slow coming to it instead, based mostly around study. For me, study is very important. I've always been a book person. So I find that while some people may denigrate just reading books, it formed the main foundation for the rest of my spiritual life.
Well, intellectual curiosity, which is kind of what it sounds like, is one way that you could definitely deepen your knowledge and your wisdom of this approach. But I would say that it's not as dull as you might recall.
Probably, yes.
Was there a moment, when you start to delve into divination and magic and all these different things, is there a moment in time that sort of stands out as the convincer that you should keep pursuing these skills? Because there's studying on one hand and there's doing on the other.
I think for me, it was when I was reading for fellow classmates at school. I would bring, by the time I actually managed to get hold of a pack of tarot cards, I was about 15. And I would take them into school and read for people during lunch breaks and things like that. And a lot of people started coming to me asking questions that for that age were very serious. When you're 15 years old and you think the world's going to end because a boy doesn't like you, things like that. Now, for these people, they were very important questions and very important issues. And I realized that I was helping them. It had gone beyond curiosity. It had gone beyond just playing. It was now helping people resolve their problems and giving people the confidence to continue resolving their problems themselves. And I think for me, that was the turning point when I realized that tarot and other forms of divination could be hugely life-changing, could have a massive impact on people. And I wanted to keep doing it then.
Now, you were pretty young when you guys started. So how did your family react?
I think, as with most parents, they thought it was a phase. They didn't really understand it. To them, I was just a kid playing with some cards. I don't think they saw it in any way in a negative light. They just kind of looked at it and went, she's having fun. As long as she's having fun, we don't mind. And then when I started collecting tarot decks when I was about 17, again, they just let it happen. There wasn't really any big family discussions about it. No one thought it was in any way in need of looking at or assessing. My parents were very much aware of my pagan faith by the time I was 16, 17. And my family isn't a particularly religious family. We went to church maybe once a year for Remembrance Sunday parades. And of course we went for christenings and funerals, but there were no prayers in my house. God didn't have a place at the table. They weren't atheists. They just didn't really bother that much. So it wasn't a conflicting issue in my family. Later on, I think my father in particular became quite sympathetic towards it. It was when I was about 20, I think, and he was picking me up from the train station that I travelled to get back home for a summer holiday visit. And we stopped by the road for some reason, I think just to have a drink. And we were standing on a bridge overlooking a beautiful flat field through which this river was meandering. It was in the New Forest, which is a beautiful part of Britain, very well known for its gorgeous horses and ponies. And we're watching all this nature go by. And he sits there and he says to me, "You know what? I think you pagans have it right." And I thought, "Oh, this is interesting." And then he said, "The more I think about it and the older I get, the more I think that God is here now, in nature, in other people, not up there in some abstract form." And it was in that moment that I realised that my dad was probably a secret pagan. And I think we understood each other from then on. And obviously when I got older and published books and tarot decks, they very much respected that aspect of it. They realised that this was something I was passionate about. And for them, it's passion that was most important. If you're following what you love, that can't be a bad thing. So they always supported me in that. They always kept asking me how I was doing, how my latest book was coming along, how the deadlines were, that kind of thing. And I think they were very, very proud of me, which is all you can ask for, really.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. I mean, so many people have quite the opposite experience with their parents. I remember when my dad found tarot cards in the house. I must have been 12 or 13. My parents were what I call coffee table Christians. They had the big Bible that collected dust sitting under, the coffee table, and some picture of a Roman looking fella in a toga.
Oh yeah, I remember
that everyone thinks everybody thinks it's Jesus. And, that was about the extent of religion in my home too. No one was selling it. Nobody was forcing it on anybody. I've never even been baptized in a predominantly Christian culture. And, all it took was a pack of tarot cards, though, to send panic through my dad. Mm-hmm. So it's really cool that you had that support and comfort from your parents, and especially your dad. Now, in the Tarot Apokalipsis book, you made a dedication that says, "For my father, Bill Huggens, whose faith and pride in my work was constant, safely home, Dad." Now, was that written after your dad had passed?
Yes, it was. In fact, I sent the final manuscript off to my publisher the week before he died, and the last conversation I had with him on the phone was to tell him that I'd finished the book and that it was off with the publishers being printed. And I am eternally grateful that he got to know that I'd finished this book before he died. Safely home is something my dad always used to say about his own relatives when they passed. I remember his aunt who passed not long before he did. And he said that for her. So, yeah, it made sense. I actually had to rewrite the dedication because I didn't realise, obviously, that he was going to die. He wasn't an ill man. It very much came as a shock to everyone. So I quickly got hold of the publishers and said, "Look, I need to pull this. It needs to change." It felt wrong for this book to go into the world without him in it.
I agree. I'm glad that you had the opportunity to do that. Now, I know how close you were with your father, and I've seen you post quite a bit about what you've dealt with emotionally over it since his passing. Now, has the loss of your father somehow transformed or changed you in your spiritual life?
Oh, yes. Yes, 100%. I think in particular, the fact that he passed suddenly was what initially changed me the most, because what people don't tell you about losing someone like that, losing someone so close to you, is that you're being forced into a massive change in yourself and your life without your permission, without your foreknowledge. it is one of the most profound initiations, I think, for you to go through. And you have to deal with that in ways that our culture does not support. We do not deal well with death. We do not deal well with letting go of our lost loved ones. We provide very little support beyond meagre counselling for those who are bereaved. So we have to tread our own paths and cut our way through this forest of loss. And for me, initially, the feelings which affected me were oddly those of relief. The fear of losing my father had been weighing on me for so many years because he'd had a couple of scares previously. And I'd always worried that things would get worse for him before he passed and that he would be in terrible pain or alone, or in fear. And in the end, it wasn't any of those things. So for me, that was a huge relief. Even though I wasn't there with him, I knew that he wasn't alone. He was with people he deeply respected. So that's a gift that I will always be grateful for. And then after that, another profound experience was the stewardship, if you will, of what happened to him afterwards. Again, something that our culture, both American and British, doesn't deal well with. We very much hand our dead over to the strangers, to the funeral industry, which by and large is a grotesque machine of money making. I speak very ill of it in general, but the people who dealt with my father were utterly brilliant, and I cannot thank them enough. They allowed us, me and my two sisters and my mother, to create his send-off in the way that he would have wanted. He allowed us everything that we wanted to do. We were able to visit my father and make sure that he was as he would have wanted to be. He was, in the end, dressed in his St. John Ambulance dress uniform. He was a volunteer with them for many years. And they allowed us to craft a funeral which was perfect for him. And I think a lot of people believe that when you lose someone close to you, you don't get involved in that side of things. You don't get involved in writing any of the funeral or in deciding how the remains are dealt with. And that's just not true. There are ways you can do it. And for me, it was very powerful to be able to do that. For me and all of my family, we each took a part in that farewell process. You know, me and my sisters all did something at the funeral. I read his eulogy. One of my sisters read a poem. The other sang a song, which was very meaningful for him. So it felt like we were fully involved. And that, in a way, helped me as a person become more acquainted with death and with loss, and made me really confront my own fears of death and the death of the self. So that was really important. And then afterwards, you end up walking a spiritual path, which is, at least for me, continually directed by your beloved dead. Now, there's a lot of talk in paganism, particularly in the paths I work in, that, you know, things like Vodou and in the heathen tradition, of honouring your ancestors. The first thing you do in Vodou is you develop a relationship with your ancestors. But that never really sat well with me because I didn't know any of them. The only people I knew of is a great-grandmother, and she was very distant to me because I hardly knew her. She died when I was 2. I have a name and a photo, and that's it. So this connection to ancestors was nebulous and unformed. But when you lose someone like your father, someone who you deeply respected and had a massive connection with, who was your best friend, the connection to your ancestors is suddenly really important. And I found myself setting up a shrine to him with some of his ashes in my lounge, and I will sit there now and talk with him over a cup of coffee, like I used to in life. My ancestor worship has become a spiritual connection with my father, and I do believe he guides me. He still provides advice, and nothing really has changed in our relationship, except that now it's more constantly on my mind. I still do things and hope that I'm making him proud, for instance. Or I still do things and think how much he would have enjoyed being here. So I think death does bring us closer to a spiritual path. It also brings us closer to an awareness of ourselves, because there's nothing that you can do to avoid those emotions. There's nothing that you can do to keep them away from yourself. You are open and bare to all of that grief, to all of that loss. And it shines this huge mirror in front of your face where you realize who you are. And I think what most people realize, I hope, is that in the end, they are beings of love. This sounds so hippie, I'm so sorry, but it's true. In the end, it all comes down to love. The last thing that we hope someone thinks of is the people they love. The last thing we want to say to someone before they go is, I love you. I would literally give everything for 5 seconds to be able to tell my father that one last time, I love you. And it's that realization that makes us walk through this world as a more open being, as a more honest being, with both ourselves and others, because the foundation of everything, no matter what you do, is love. And I think that was the biggest realization for me, and the biggest driver of my spiritual path from that point forward. And it's odd to say that losing my father was both the worst and the best thing that has happened to me. I don't think I would have thought I would be saying that before it happened.
I know exactly how you feel in the way those emotions, it's like a train that you can't stop. You didn't even know it was heading for you. When my own father passed in October of 2014, suddenly there was a lot of complicated emotions. We didn't have the greatest relationship. And, there's a lot of things you start thinking, oh, I wish I could have said this and I wish I could have said that. But you're right. It does bring you face to face with a lot of things in your own spiritual life that both challenges you and deepens it at the same time, specifically in your ancestral work. I mean, I was the other way. I know a lot of my recent generation who has passed. More women than men. We've got some very powerful women in my family. They're just willful women who control large tribes.
Wonderful.
So it's not hard to wrap my head around a concept in heathenry we have that's called the Disir.
Yes, I'm very familiar with them.
Yeah, and the idea of powerful women looking over your life is just something I was born into.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you said, you said a lot of things in that wonderful answer, and thank you for sharing such powerful emotional experiences. You said that we in the West, specifically the British and American cultures, don't deal with death properly. And I think you're right. What would you suggest as a manner of changing that?
Oh, I must admit, I think that at the moment, very sadly, the funeral industry is beyond help. It's such a huge industry that even a movement like the Order of the Good Death, which I'll talk about shortly, isn't going to change it. It is a money-making industry. It's going to milk us for all it's worth. But one thing I would say to anyone listening who's interested in tackling this on a very personal level, and perhaps preparing for their own death and the death of their friends and family, there is a movement called the Order of the Good Death, and you can find them online. There's a website. I think that might in fact be the web address, orderofthegooddeath.com or something like that, which provides resources to enable you to approach death in a positive way, with very practical steps as well as more spiritual theoretical steps. It provides resources for how to make a will, how to go about becoming an organ donor. It provides information about various funeral practices and industries. And it also encourages you as a movement to think about your own death and how you're going to prepare for it. Not only in things like having a living will and testament or writing a will, but also living in a way which means that when death comes, you have properly lived. I think the founder of the movement, I think she is, wrote a book called Smoke Gets in Your Eyes. And it's her biographical experiences of working in a crematorium in the States, and how she came to this realization of the requirement for a good death and the massive overhaul of the funeral industry. And it's a beautiful book. It's a really easy read. And at times a very uncomfortable read, because it doesn't shy away from some of the more graphic details of things like what the body goes through when it's cremated, things like that. But it really blows wide open some of the practices going on out there. and makes you realize that they're not necessary. We don't have to be embalmed, for instance. I didn't know this until I read the book. People think that for some reason the dead body is unhygienic. And this is just not the case. The dead body is not a harbinger of disease or infection. There is no need for embalming at all. But the funeral industry does it simply because it adds more money to their bill. There's also a discussion in there about how it's become that the funeral industry takes away the power from the bereaved, and instead does it all for them. And there's an exploration of how we can overcome that as individuals when we've lost family members. Highly recommended book. Caitlin O'Donoghue, I think that's the name. It's definitely a Caitlin. Sorry, I can't remember specifically. But yeah, that two things there: Order of the Good Death and reading that book, just to begin to open your eyes to it all. But I think as bereaved people, we need to be more. We need to feel more empowered to demand things of the funeral service we've chosen. This is our dead. This is our relative. They are our blood. And there are no laws which stop us having a say in how they are dealt with. Yes, there are laws which perhaps forbid things like a Viking ship burial. But there's a lot of autonomy we have, which we don't realise we have because no one talks about it. And that's the problem, is no one talks. No one realises what resources are available or what we can do or what is illegal and what's legal. And I've always felt that communication is key to everything, and death is no stranger to that. The more we talk about death, the more we talk about loss, the more we talk about how we deal with the dead after they're gone, the better off we'll be as a race. I think if we don't talk about it, if we don't research it, we give ourselves over to ignorance and fear, and we start to fear our own dead. And that is such a shame, to fear those we previously loved simply because their body is now inert. It's odd, very odd. To some cultures that just isn't a thing. They deal with their dead very much as they do their living. And they're not afraid to see a dead body or touch a dead body or lay out their own dead or wash their father's body. And they're not afraid to carry on a relationship with their dead after they're gone. We have cut ourselves off from our ancestors in the Western world, and we've cut ourselves off from even our most recently beloved dead. And I don't think it's healthy at all. We need a connection. And that, I think, is perhaps why so many pagan traditions say to you first, deal with your ancestors, then deal with the gods.
Yeah, that doesn't seem... Let me get my thoughts straight here. Stutter all over myself. When I first started exploring paganism, and when I was a teenager, I'm 40 years old today, I did not encounter any idea in anything I was reading that suggested ancestors were important or even a thing. Today, fast forward all these years, now I eventually found my way to the right things, but today it seems that even witchcraft traditions who never used to mention this are now placing the importance on ancestral worship and honoring, placing it back in the curriculum where it belongs. Mm-hmm. And I've always wondered where that shift came, if there was some movement that I was never aware of in paganism in the West, or if it was just sort of ancestors themselves pushing this forward.
I think for me, I think what I've seen is that when I started getting into paganism, which is nearly 20 years ago now, people were kind of grabbing stuff from all sorts of traditions all over the world. You know, they take a bit of Greek from here, a bit of Celtic from there, a bit of African from there, and mix it all up into one eclectic tradition and call it Wicca. Mm-hmm. And this very much fell out of favour, perhaps 10 years ago, when people start going, hang on a second, that's not how this works, guys. you can't just do that. And it does work for some people, but by and large, it's very rude for a start.
Sure.
And it can be very confusing.
cultural appropriation entered the lexicon?
I have very mixed feelings about that. We'll talk about that later.
You and I both.
What I think happened instead was people went, okay, we're in a Western culture that is very much disenfranchised from any sort of religious cultural heritage beyond Christianity. What do we have? Now in Britain we've got, you can't see what I'm doing here, but my hands are forming inverted quotation marks here when I say Celtic. We have Celtic stuff because Celtic is a whole big thing, and it's not what people think it is. But in the end, I think people looked at what we have and what we have in common, no matter where we are, no matter who we are, no matter where in the world we are, is ancestors. It's something we can work with 100% reliably that isn't going to offend anyone. It's not going to be stealing anything from anywhere. Everyone's got ancestors. Everywhere you walk, you're walking on the bones and the blood of those who have passed. So I think that's perhaps one of the influences of the sudden interest in ancestor worship. Everyone's got them, simply.
Agreed. Now, you said in a talk that you were doing with Jake Stratton Kent that you said, and we're going to get into that, that hopefully as we form communities that the dead will start to be treated in that way. And I think personally when you said that way, you meant honored. And you go on to say, hopefully the dead will come back and start to be tended to. Let's unpack that a little bit. Mm-hmm. When you say the dead will start to come back and be tended to, is that this ancestral worship that you're discussing now?
Yes, but ancestral worship of those who you actually knew in life, I think. It's very easy to half-heartedly serve ancestors you never met. But when you've met them, when you know who they were, when you know what they liked to drink, when you know what their favourite food was, you start to see tending to your ancestors on a very different level. For example, I used to serve my ancestors in a traditional way which bore no real reference to how I would have known them if I'd known them. But when my father passed, I realised that the best way to tend to him, to serve him, to offer things to him, was to make his favourite drink, his favourite food, sit listening to his favourite music with him and having a chat. When I speak of tending to your dead, there's a two-way thing going on there. We're not just tending to our dead, we're tending to ourselves, because our dead are very much part of us and part of what we have become. No man is an island, as is the old saying. And for me, that's because everyone is influenced to become who they are by other people. And at some point, those people die and they become ancestors. So when we're tending to our dead, we're not only acknowledging where we've come from, but we are respecting that. And I think far too many people these days don't have a respect for their origins or a respect for who they were before or how they've become who they are. And there's very much a lack of awareness of who we are now because of that. And again, it all feeds into the trying to overcome fear of the dead and fear of death itself, which is part and parcel of tending to your dead, I think, for me.
What would you say to people who suggest that, for generations back and way back, our ancestors are Christian? Mm-hmm. How do you think they feel about being honored in pagan sort of ways?
Christians also honored their ancestors. It wouldn't be uncommon for people at a Christian wake to raise a glass in honour of the recently deceased, or once a year on the anniversary of that person's death or their birthday to sit and have a drink in honour of them. That's not much different at all. You're still sitting and thinking of them. And many people, even Christians, say they still talk to their dead. That also is no different to what a pagan might do. When I said everyone has ancestors in common, I wasn't just talking about the fact that everyone has dead people in their past. Everyone relates to their dead on some level, even if they don't realise that what they're doing is what we might call working with your dead or ancestor worship. They still remember their dead. They still often give offerings. Now, in my main tradition that I work in, which is Haitian Vodou, we often work with ancestors that were very much Christian. In fact, many of them were Catholic. And that has never been a problem. We serve them with Catholic prayers. We give them Bibles. We give them a rosary. In a tradition which needed Catholicism to survive. It doesn't seem like an opposition or a contradiction to serve Christian ancestors. And what I would like to believe, whether this is true or not is another question, but what I would like to believe is that after death, religion becomes less important. Because there's something else which unites you beyond religion, beyond any ideas of gods. So I'm entirely cool with speaking a Christian prayer and singing Amazing Grace for my ancestors if that's what I think they would have liked. Because I grew up in a Christian country. Christianity is in my blood. Christianity has been passed down to me, whether I like it or not, and I do actually quite like it. And I'm perfectly happy working in a Christian way, if that makes sense. I work with saints quite a lot of the time. Again, Haitian Vodou works with saints all the time. There's no stranger among the saints to us. I should think for other traditions it might be more difficult. Perhaps for traditions in which Christianity has been more of an enemy than an ally. But I think it's wise to remember that no tradition has formed in a vacuum. And in particular, the modern pagan tradition formed almost as a battle against Christianity. For many, for quite a long time, it was a way to say, I reject Christianity so much that I do what is considered to be the complete opposite. I'm going to be a witch, for instance. And while I don't agree with that being a healthy way to choose one's religion, it is what happened. I think we have a lot to thank Christianity for, as well as a lot to dislike it for in history. But there is a firm foundation in the Western world of Christianity, of Catholicism. And I think we should respect that.
Yeah. I like how you point out that there's already this instinctual way of approaching ancestral honoring in the culture as it is. And even when they come forth and say, well, how could you honor your dead if they're all Christian? Well, as you said, they're already doing it.
Yeah. I don't think that sitting and having a drink and talking to your dead dad is in any way part of a specific tradition. It's a universal thing.
I agree. Now, going back to that talk that you had with Jake Stratton Kent, how did you find yourself in a discussion on necromancy with that gentleman?
I just want to say Jake is an amazing guy, and if anyone has the chance to read any of his work, please do so. He is what I consider to be a foremost scholar in the field, particularly on things like Goetia. And he's an utterly captivating person to learn from. So how I ended up in a discussion on necromancy, again, this is one of those things where I'm not quite sure how it happened. But when I went to university, I started out by studying philosophy at undergraduate level. And over the course of the 3 years, I fell more in love with ancient history, particularly late antique Rome. So when I finished my degree, I applied for a postgraduate degree at Cardiff University to study late antique religion, and got accepted onto the course. I studied various aspects of the period, and ended up falling in love with the cult of Mithras, the Roman cult of Mithras. I don't quite know why, actually. I think I was reading the Greek magical papyri. Again, everyone read it if you can. It's edited by Hans Dieter Betz, and you can find it in English translation. It's about £30 on Amazon. And in the Greek magical papyri, we've basically got a bunch of handbooks written by sorcerers from the 1st century BCE to the 4th or 5th century CE, and it's all their spells, all their rituals, how they went about various magical operations, and it's utterly fascinating. So I was studying this and came across what's called the Mithras liturgy, which is a theurgical rite to attain spiritual oneness with the sun god Helios. It's called the Mithras liturgy wrongly. It's not actually for Mithras, but people see Mithras and Helios in that text very much as one. And that got me interested in actually researching the cult of Mithras to see if this text had any relation to it at all. So I was researching Mithras and somehow came across all of the vast information we have on ancient Greek and Roman necromancy. People don't really realize this, but it was very prevalent. And we have a lot of sources on it, both practically how to do it, as well as more dramatic Latin novelists who wrote about evil witches performing these necromantic rites. And even some of our most famous authors from Greece, Homer, the Iliad, he wrote a passage in which somebody summons the dead from Hades and makes an offering to them of blood in order to speak with the blind seer Tiresias and get information from him. It's a clearly necromantic rite hidden in one of our most commonly read Greek texts. And that's found everywhere throughout Greek and Roman literature. So I just became utterly fascinated with it. I don't know why. Maybe I'm just a morbid kind of person. I've always been interested in death. And it became my main focus of what would become my PhD. I was looking at, it's going to sound a bit of a mouthful, malefic-erotic magic and necromancy using voodoo dolls in late antique
that's just
Rome.
a Wednesday night around here.
Yeah. Tell me about it. So there was a lot of stuff in there that I got to really get my teeth into. Unfortunately, the PhD fell through because of lack of funding. Won't go into that. I'm still very bitter. But I carried on studying it from an academic perspective. And what I wanted to do was make available this knowledge to the general pagan community, because there's a lot of people in the pagan community that rely on texts which are not scholarly. They are not academic. They are not very well cited. And to me, that's a real shame. We've got so much historical stuff out there which is utterly fantastic, like the Greek magical papyri. It's beautiful and it's still usable in its original form. And people are going around ignoring it. And it's just such a shame. So I wanted to make it interesting for pagans who are practicing magic, to understand not only how it functions, but also why it's important, again, to work with our dead. It all comes back to working with the dead. Because for me, it's a common human urge, as well as a common human fear. And it's really important that we approach it from many different angles. So I wrote a lot of papers on the practice of necromancy in various traditions. There's an anthology called the Conjure Codex, which I wrote a paper for about necromancy in both the Graeco-Roman tradition and in Hoodoo in the Americas, and how there are so many similarities between the different practices, which is utterly fascinating. So my work on that ended up with me doing various talks around the UK about necromancy and various associated practices. And one of those was the lovely debate with Jake Stratton-Kent.
Well, I'll make sure that the link to that video is in the show notes.
Oh, wonderful.
It's a great talk. And I think you more than held your own against him.
Thank you. Well, it wasn't really against. It was more we were I think we were bouncing off each other. None of it was planned. We were just kind of exploring stuff that we were passionate about, which was absolutely lovely. So, yeah.
Yeah, it is a great talk. I'll make sure that everybody sees that.
Thank you.
Now, I'm sure that anyone listening to this is wondering why I haven't asked this question yet, because you have said voodoo and hoodoo on countless occasions already. How does a girl in Wales find herself involved in Haitian voodoo?
Yeah. So, I think it comes down to one day, Baron Samedi showed up and said, "Hey, girl."
Oh, boy. Just like that. Hey, girl? Or was it like, hey, girl?
Yeah, like that. I can't do the American accent, I'm afraid. I'm not going to try. So it was like what you said. And I ended up teaming up with a couple of people here who were very interested in it. And just started doing it. Now, there's one thing that I think people need to be aware of with voodoo, particularly in the house that I am initiated in. For us, the spirits of voodoo, yes, they have race. Yes, they are in many cases black, but a lot of them are white. A lot of them come from Europe initially. And they choose you. They come to you. You don't choose them. There's a lot of people I know who tried to practice voodoo without being called to it, and ended up just walking away from it eventually for various reasons, and that's fine. But I think those who actually have the spirits call to them stick with it because the spirits have called to you. So we started approaching it in the wrong way initially, I must admit. We were coming very much from a Western magic viewpoint. So we tried to do things like channel the spirits of voodoo. And we started doing things like hermetic magic rites to them and setting up Wiccan altars to them. And it was all a big mess. I won't be afraid of admitting we made mistakes, and it was the wrong way to practice voodoo, because voodoo is a living, breathing tradition which has its own way of doing things. But I forget how it happened, but one of us ended up making contact with a house in New Jersey, Sosyete Gade Nou Leve, which was led by Hungan Hector Salva. And she ended up going over there and initiating. And once we realized that this was a real thing, the temple was cool, the Hungan was not going to scam us, because you never know if you haven't met the person, we considered it and said, well, let's initiate too. So Hungan Hector came over and we did the initiation here in Wales. There were about 5 of us that went through the initiation together. And from there, we formed a subsidiary in Cardiff of Sosyete Gade Nou Leve, and were holding services for the spirits maybe 4 times a year, sometimes more, having regular visits from Hungan Hector. And it worked. I've never seen anything yet to say to me, hey, white girl, you can't do this. You know? And the thing is about voodoo, there's many types of voodoo. Yes, there's Haitian voodoo, which is what I'm initiated in. But there's also Dominican voodoo, which is called 21 Divisions voodoo. And each of those 21 divisions is a division of spirits. And many of them have origins elsewhere. There is a division called the Vikongo division, which is actually Viking spirits, for instance. And there's a spirit in that division called Freyna, which I'm sure is ringing bells for you right now. Yeah,
you've got all my little spidey senses going off.
Yeah, and she is very much like Freya. There's also another form of kind of voodoo which Sosyete Gade Nou Leve practices, which is called Sanse, which is a spiritualist tradition, beginning with Allan Kardec, the French spiritualist. And it very much focuses on white table spiritualism, where the mediums will be possessed by various spirits, and they can be from literally anywhere. There have been ancestors come through, the recently dead, as well as gods, spirits, all sorts of things. And to me, it's reminded me that these beings are very much a thing. They do exist, or at least they exist in as much as we give them power to exist, if you want to believe it that way. There is an objective existence to them.
And for people who don't know, who is Baron Samedi?
He is one of the spirits, or Loa, we call them, of the dead and of death. He's had various movie cameos, most notably in Live and Let Die, the James Bond movie.
Okay.
He's often depicted as a guy wearing a pair of sunglasses with one lens knocked out, a top hat, and a very swish undertaker's suit, often with some sort of suggestively held walking stick. He is not only the spirit of death and the dead, but also of children, of life, and of sex. Because really, all those things are interlinked. When we create new people, they come into this world under pain of death. We very much birth people under sentence of death. That's a horrible way to put it, but it's true. But at the same time, he wants more people to live more thoroughly, because he knows in the end we all go the same way. We all die. We all lose that. And he doesn't want us to waste a second of what we have before that. So he's a very important spirit in a lot of different voodoo traditions. And he's often the one which calls people in the West first because he's so familiar to us. There are lots of other spirits of the dead in voodoo who come under his influence. He is almost the leader in some traditions of the other Loire of the dead. And he has a wife called Maman Brigitte, who some say was once Irish and comes from the Irish saint, Saint Bridget. She has white skin and red hair.
I've seen images of that particular spirit, and I have to agree. I think if any roots are there at all, it definitely goes back to that Irish goddess. My theory, just from the outside looking in.
There's no real way of knowing. That's the thing with a lot of these spirits. We have these ideas, but there's no real historical way of proving one way or the other. But I think we should be aware and think of it that way.
Yeah, I have a very syncretic kind of view of the gods until I don't.
Yes, I know exactly what you mean.
I think that, Odin is Woden, is Othin, Thor is Thunar, who is, so on. But I don't think Thor and, Jupiter or whoever he's compared to are the same necessarily. And, or Odin and Hermes are quite necessarily the same, but I can see the argument on where people come up with that. And so I'm syncretic until I'm not.
Yeah, I think that the Romans very much saw the Germanic gods as forms of their gods. It's very interesting when you read about what they said about the Germanic gods when they came across them. They very much associated them with their own gods, which is fascinating. It's either the desire of the Romans to take everything under their wing and claim it as theirs, or they genuinely thought that all the gods were one god or several gods. It's very interesting.
They were syncretic until they weren't.
Yes.
But sometimes I think it's just, you have to have the language to describe what you have, and you're not writing for the audience that you're studying. You're writing for the audience at home. So to say that they worship, Hermes, or this tribe has a goddess that is apparently Isis, maybe that is a combination of both viewing them for the people at home, and maybe they really genuinely think that's what they're doing. I don't know.
In some cases, they actually did become conflated. For instance, in Britain, there's a place called Bath, in which there is a temple to Sulis Minerva. Now, Sulis was a Celtic goddess at the time. She was, from what we can tell, a goddess of springs. And she was written about by the Romans, from what we can tell, as Minerva. But the temple is to Sulis Minerva. And she is seen as her own separate being, this Sulis Minerva. And it's absolutely fascinating to see that happen, that they took on this goddess with both names, with both properties. And Celtic and Roman alike seem to have worshipped her. Now,
it sounds to me that it was your voodoo practice that sort of solidified the reality of the gods to you. Would that be correct?
Probably, yes. I hadn't thought about it before, but now you mention it, yes, I think when I say reality of the gods, and objectivity, for me, that isn't actually what many people think as objectivity. I think personally there is an objective existence. They exist outside us. But, and I hope I'm not being some sort of heretic here, I think without us they wouldn't exist. There is a symbiotic relationship between human and God. We very much created them, and in turn they sustain us. It's not a very popular viewpoint, I don't think.
I hear it more often than you might think.
That's good to know.
Yeah, it's not quite the one I adhere to, but I think when it comes to the nature of metaphysics, I mean, all we can ever do is make educated guesses with our instincts. I just don't think metaphysics is the realm for certainty. No.
I think whatever we do, we just have to be comfortable with what we do believe. I'm perfectly happy with the idea that the gods don't exist at all. I'd be fine with that, because in the end, what matters to me is has my belief in the gods made me a better person? Has my belief in the gods inspired me? And I don't think you necessarily have to have a belief in an objective existence of the gods to have been inspired by them. We live in a world where we can be inspired to be better people by media, by things and stories that are very much made up. And people forget that I like to think that even if the gods are just made up, they've still had a profound impact on me, and I'm cool with that.
Mm-hmm. Fair enough. Now, I want to go back to a moment in our discussion that made you draw a breath in rather sharply.
Okay.
And I promised that we would get on that again. The phrase cultural appropriation. Now, this is a very controversial subject in our time. Mm-hmm. And it sounds to me like you have some opinions.
You want people to hate me, don't you?
No. Now, first of all, I have exposed Kim Huggens to the world as a necromancer. You're welcome.
You didn't need much exposing. It was already out there. It's YouTube evidence.
Yeah, well, everybody seems to think you're just a tarot reader. So here's the news, folks.
Just a tarot reader. Well.
I'm kidding. Now, what is it about cultural appropriation that makes the hairs stand up?
Okay, before we carry on, I'm going to pour myself another glass of mead.
Yeah, it's worthy of a drink.
Yeah. So, I respect that we need to respect every single culture on this planet that has ever been and is. It is vital that we do so, because so many of the evils of this world come from disrespecting other cultures. And the sooner we as a race learn that, the sooner we can get our asses in gear and sort this shit out. However, there are a vast number of cultures and places that would not exist without what people now call cultural appropriation. The Romans, we'll go back to them, were a perfect example of this. They literally stole whole cults and uprooted them and stuck them in Rome. They went to Egypt and said, "That's a nice cult of Isis you've got there. We'll have it, thank you." And then they brought it over to Britain. We actually have a temple to Isis in Britain. Like, I can't imagine many Celts stepped foot in Egypt, but Isis came here. Same as Mithras. We have temples of Mithras in Britain. Again, people mingled. People have always mingled. People have interbred. Bloodlines have become mixed. And our gods have too. And our cultural practices have too. There are some cultures, such as Japanese culture, which pride themselves on taking inspiration from other cultures. And the West, I think, is particularly good at it. What some people see as disrespect, I see as respect. Because in looking at another culture's practices and gods and beliefs and sometimes taking them on and practicing them ourselves, we're saying, I think what you've got here is a good thing. I want in on this. The more we experience other ways of thinking, other cultures, the better we become as people and as a race. I think it was Joseph Campbell who said, read myths, read other people's myths. And he said, when you read other people's myths, that's when you start to get it. That's when things start to make sense, because we accept our own myths as truth and we don't see what they're actually trying to say. But when we read other people's myths, we are looking into the other with a capital O, and we start thinking about what that means. And then we get the message that they're trying to get across, because we are actively thinking about them not as truth, but as myth, as folklore, and we're looking for the meaning there. So I think it's incredibly important that we do that. The more we understand other people's cultures, the more we understand that even if people look the same, look different to us, even if they have a different skin colour, even if they come from a different place or have a different religion or speak in a different language, there are fundamental things that we have in common. And that, I think, we are losing sight of more and more as the years go on. And it's the one thing I think will stand the greatest chance of destroying us as a people. I won't get political. I was going to talk about America at this time. But I think I'll leave that. But there's a lot of demonization of the other that's occurring, and it's happened on my own shores. You know, we recently, in June 2016, had a vote about whether or not we should leave the EU. And some of the people I spoke to who voted to leave the EU did so for reasons that were very logical. I personally disagree with them. I very much wanted to remain in the EU. But there are a vast number of people that voted to leave the EU because for them it was a way of reclaiming what they called sovereignty. And they demonized the other, those who weren't British. And there was a massive drive just after that to demonize immigrants in particular. People who came to this country for sanctuary, for better opportunities. And it's dangerous. And it's to me a great evil of our time to demonize the other. And there's a vast number of people who don't even understand the people that they're demonizing, particularly Muslims. There's a lot of very anti-Muslim rhetoric doing the rounds all over the West at the moment. And you know what? I can see there's a reason to have fear. One of the biggest threats is, at the moment, things like Daesh. But there are a great majority of Muslims who are peaceful, who are loving, who are kind, and who are condemning the actions of these fundamentalists. And we're not bothering to learn about them. And there are people who go against cultural appropriation who would say that we shouldn't take any part in their cultural activities because that is cultural appropriation. I say no, that is the wrong way to go about this. We need to unite. We need to take the hand of our brothers and sisters, no matter what religion, no matter what colour of their skin, no matter what creed, and understand what they practice and what they believe. Because only then can we properly stand together against the fundamentalism that is plaguing us. Cultural appropriation is a terrible word because it doesn't actually do what it says on the tin. And people are applying it to positive practices, such as learning about other cultures. The best way to learn, in some cases, is to do. You know, when I was a kid at school, we would learn about different religions by doing it. I remember sitting down in an RE lesson, a religious education lesson, and the teacher taking us through a Buddhist meditation. None of us were Buddhist. Was that cultural appropriation? I don't know, but it worked. It made me realise some of the point of the practices of Buddhism through doing it. They would take us on trips to mosques, to synagogues, to learn about how they worship. And it was incredibly important for children to see this because it starts from a very early age, people realising that these aren't other. They are us. They have the same ideas and desires and goals and fears as us. And the more we explore different cultures, the more we try out different practices, the more we realise that. So to me, cultural appropriation, I see where it came from. I do see the fear of what can be done with it, particularly in America, where there's a lot of claiming of Native American practices and ancestry. But I think it's very useful to do things that aren't of your culture. Now, when it comes to claiming something as your own, that's different. When you say, I'm going to do this Buddhist meditation, but actually it's a Wiccan thing, that's when you're being a wrong person.
Right.
That's where I draw the line and say, you know what, do what you want, but tell it like it is. Say what it is. Don't claim it as your own if it's not. I'm okay with people saying, you know what, I'm British, but I'm going to go and do some African thing. But tell us it's an African thing. Don't make shit up. Don't lie. Say it. Say what it is. I expect I've just become very unpopular with a lot of your listeners, and I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay. I'm unpopular with some of my listeners.
They've got this far in the recording, though.
That's right.
Fine.
Well, let's take this one step further.
Oh, no.
Oh, no. Now, you are a part of Vodou traditions, and you brought up heathenry as well.
Yes.
And for all those out there who don't know, I am not only a heathen, I'm a client. I am on the high read of the Troth itself. Now, there is a very hot button issue that always comes up in heathenry, especially in the United States. I'm sure it does in Britain, that involves race and ethnicity. Yeah. Now, I'm in the camp that says all who hear the call are welcome. Mm-hmm. How would you feel about that?
Racism to me is absolutely 100% abhorrent. It's one of the very few things which pushes my buttons in so many ways. I can't even begin to voice how evil I think it is. And I say evil with every understanding of what that word means. Again, it goes back to the demonization of the other. Now, I'm not entirely sure about the history of heathenry or where this particular idea of what a heathen should be came from. I have some religious association with the heathen gods, Odin in particular, but I don't consider myself part of the heathen community and certainly no heathen organisation. So my knowledge of the history of it is very lacking. But I would utterly condemn any person who said that because of the colour of your skin or the origin of your family, you can't worship these particular gods. Particularly because historically Scandinavians went so far around the world and spread their gods so far. There's suggestions that it was Norsemen that came to America first, for instance. Mm-hmm. What we consider to be this idea of purity of blood or some weird shit, I don't think was as much of a concern for those in history. They were concerned with expanding and settling in new lands. The Vikings were some of the most successful settlers in new lands, in fact. And of course, they came over here to the British Isles. And a great number of our place names now still tell of that settlement. I just don't understand people that assign race to religion. It doesn't make sense to me. I don't get it. In my spiritual practice, none of the spirits or gods that I have ever spoken to have made an issue of it, so why the hell should we? My Odin has never had an issue with anyone of any colour skin, of any type of bloodline, whatever you might call that, making offerings to him.
Absolutely agreed. I'll let you off the hook right there.
You're asking a girl in Wales who practices voodoo what she thinks of race in things. Come on.
Well, yeah, that's why I had to ask, because you're a girl in Wales practicing voodoo.
Yep.
Come on.
Yep.
Now, speaking of all this comparative religion, here's the transition question of the year. You wrote the book that goes along with Tarot Apokalipsis, which covers a massive amount of mythological ground. How did that project come about?
This has a lovely story, actually. Now, Eric C. Dunn, the artist for the Tarot Illuminati and the Tarot Apokalipsis, I have never met in real life, which I plan to rectify soon. But originally he posted, I can't even remember what year it was anymore, 2013 maybe, on a Facebook group saying, "Hello, I've got this deck I've nearly completed. Unfortunately, my author can't complete the project. I'm looking for a writer to write the companion book for the Tarot Illuminati." And I looked at some of the images, and he posted an image of the Queen of Swords, which was Queen Elizabeth. And I fell in love. And I said to myself, I must contact this guy. So I sent him a Facebook message, and I said, "Here's my idea for the book," and gave him basically a sample chapter. And he came back and said, "We are thinking on exactly the same lines. Let's work together." So having never met this guy, and having been given a deadline of 2.5 months to write a book, we worked together. And I produced the companion guide to the Tarot Illuminati, which became a best-selling deck published by Los Scarabeo.
Don't be modest about your book. The book Complete Guide to the Tarot Illuminati by you was awarded Best Tarot Book of the Year in 2013 by the Tarot Professionals Association and the Outstanding Cartomancy Book of 2013. So give yourself a little pat on the back, too.
I actually forgot about that. That's awful, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, yeah, that happened. And me and Eric became really good friends. Obviously, when you're working so closely with someone on something like a tarot deck, you become really good friends and you get to know them very well. So then we finished the project of the Tarot Illuminati, and he went, "So shall we do it again?" And I said, "Yes, let's make another deck." So the Tarot Apokalipsis was born. And this time I wasn't just the author to a deck which had already been made. This time we worked together on the ideas for the cards, the designs on the images. And it was very much a joint project. And it was everything I hoped it would be, working with Eric so closely. It was very much our way of exploring tarot through world mythology. Eric is fascinated by all sorts of different types of mythology and cultures, and it comes across in his artwork. He really wants to get across these different, very, very, very different cultures, in fact, in his artwork. So we spent a couple of years working on that deck, and it was published. It became a thing. I'm not really sure what else to say.
Well, I've got it. It graces my home. And the book is fascinating. I remember when you were writing this book, I got to sneak peek some of the Norse stuff you were writing.
Yes.
and I even got blamed for distracting you with Norse stuff while you were trying to write something else.
Yes. I'm very grateful for that, though, because I'm always interested in Norse mythology. Yeah. It's one of my things.
Oh, I wear it as a badge of honor. Uh-huh. Now, you told me once that the Tarot Illuminati was your main reading deck. Is that still true?
No, the Tarot Apokalipsis is now my main reading deck.
The Illuminati's old hat. Now,
sometimes I do get it out often for myself, but the Tarot Apokalipsis, it's everything I wanted to be and more. I still look at it and go, wow, this is a thing. I'm in love with it, and I forget what I wrote. So when I read the book, I'm constantly surprised that I wrote that.
Well, it's a fascinating book. I have to say, for a tarot companion book, it's not getting the credit it's due. Just as a mythology book, you've collected in-depth, cited sources, wisdom from around the world to dig into each card and the suits and the major arcana. And I think it's a wonderful addition to anyone's library.
Thank you. To me, the fact that it's got all the sources cited is very important. Obviously, coming from an academic background, I can't abide people that just state stuff and don't tell you where they got that stuff from. So I'm just looking at the book here. I'm very proud to say that we have, in total, 570 footnotes citing sources. It's incredibly important that we acknowledge where we get our sources from, because I think people need to realise I'm not just making this shit up. It's there in history, in culture, in mythology. And it also means that they can go and look up those sources and research it for themselves. And I think one of the most important things a writer can do is allow the reader to go forth and learn something new for themselves, find new sources, and make that journey of discovery for themselves, rather than just be told everything. So yeah, I'm very proud of it from that perspective. Being allowed to be an academic in a tarot book is very unusual, but if I hadn't done it, it wouldn't be my work.
That's absolutely true. Now, you are what I would call a bit of a rock star in live action role playing and tabletop role playing games.
A rock star, fantastic.
You go far and above beyond the call of what I ever did playing tabletop games. You've got some fantastic costumes and things that you get involved in doing this. And no worries, I'm going to at least steal one picture from Facebook so people can see. Now, you have said on more than one occasion that your role-playing games relate to your spirituality. And now that's bad news for all of us who grew up denying that D&D got us into the occult. But I just wonder how is it that how do you tie those together? What makes you feel that way?
First off, I'd start by saying that it was the occult that got me into D&D. So, the other way around.
I must make that same confession. Nobody ever believes me.
It was a friend from the Pagan Society at uni that said, "Hey, have you tried D&D?" And I ended up being a massive fan. So for me, LARP more than tabletop RPG, LARP being live action roleplay, is an opportunity for us to act out aspects of character or situations that we wouldn't be able to in real life. And these situations frequently challenge us as people. They bring out aspects of ourselves that we didn't know were there. I've seen the shyest of people be put in situations where they have to speak publicly in front of 150 others, and they've shone like a sun doing it, because to them, they're not being themselves at the time. They have an excuse to do it, and they're not afraid to fail as much. I've seen people who are often meek, retiring women become terrifying shield maidens in a battle line. I've seen men who would ordinarily shy from responsibility being given command of units of warriors. Now, these things aren't real. They're not real warriors. We're not killing real orcs, but the fact that we're acting these things out plays on the inner self, and it directly influences the subconscious. And it's the subconscious where changes really take place. That's why we do things like rituals. That's why we undergo initiations. To me, LARP is a form of ritual. It's a form of initiation. It forces you to think in very different ways as well. Some of my characters, for instance, are not very nice people. They have to make very nasty decisions, and being forced to think about those decisions makes me really consider what it's like to be this kind of person. It's also given me a greater understanding of what I'm capable of as a person. Now, to me, spirituality serves no function if it's not going to help you become a better person. And LARP very much serves that same function. It's challenged me beyond what I ever thought I would be doing. And it's made me a stronger person because of it. It's made me a more confident person. And I think my partner, who's also very much into LARP, would agree that he has become, for instance, a better communicator through LARP. He has become a better decision maker, and he's taken on more responsibility and been more comfortable with it than he would in real life. And as such, his real life has become much easier. And he's taken on those roles more readily as himself. There's also a very odd phenomenon, which there are several friends of mine who do LARP who will understand, because it's happened to them. In LARP, we have a great number of gods. Some of them are based on real gods. Some of them, like Odin, are very popular in LARP. For instance, there's lots of people who play Viking-style characters who worship the Norse gods. But even the made-up gods, because people have such emotion towards them, even if the faith isn't real, the emotion is, they take on some sort of meaning for that person in their subconscious. And they do start to influence us, I think. One of my friends has been role-playing a person dedicated to a particular war god who has ravens as her symbol for a number of years. Now he sees ravens everywhere. And every time he sees a raven, he's reminded of that particular god and what she represents. And that has exactly the same effect on the mind as what we might call real life religion. It triggers certain feelings or emotions or changes in state of being or awareness of things. But for me in particular, the physicality of LARP has enabled me to become a more spiritual person. It's put me in situations that you will never get in real life unless you're actually in the military, which I will never be. It's forced me into a suit of armour and put a sword and shield in my hand and said, here, fight everything. Fight all those evils that you want to rail against. And it's given me the power to do that. And that is incredibly important, particularly, I'm going to be a bit of a feminist at this point, particularly for women in our culture, to be able to feel that they are strong, that they are confident, that they are powerful, and they are important. We are very much raised as women to be quiet, to be gentle, to be kind, to be beautiful, to be attractive to men. And the side of us that wants to wage war on evil, that wants to defend ourselves, that wants to defend everything we love, that wants to shout from the rooftop something we truly believe in, is not encouraged. But in LARP it is. And it's the encouragement of these things that, to me, serves an incredibly important function, which is also what religion and paganism, spirituality serves. And that's to empower us, to help transform us into more whole people, to pick out bits of our personality that lay dormant and force us to reflect upon them, to act upon them, to explore them. And in so doing, achieve a greater awareness of ourselves. Tabletop roleplay is similar. It doesn't have the physicality that LARP does, but it has the same ability to force us to think in different ways. So for me, yes, it's a lot of fun. It's my most favourite hobby, but it is very much a life-changing process that I undergo every time I enter a battlefield, or every time I spend a weekend as a different character. And I think a lot of LARPers feel that way, but don't necessarily have the language to put it into. They understand that it can be very transformative, but because they don't necessarily come from the same background I do, they don't put it in the same words.
Well, I agree. That's, I mean, you couldn't have summed it up any better than that. And to be honest, I'm the father of 3 daughters, and if any of my girls adapted any of those attitudes or mindsets to which you just described, I know I've done my job right as a father.
We need more young women to be raised that way. We really do. The world is crying out for strong women. In a world where, I'm going to be political, in a world where Trump was considered a better candidate for your president than a woman, we need more young women being strong and confident. I
agree. Yep. We would definitely need more women being confident and strong. I mean, I'm touched on the fact that I grew up in a family that had strong women, willful women in it. I mean, I even knew my great grandmother growing up on my mother's side. She lived to be about 107 years old.
Wow.
Yeah. And my great grandmother her daughter lived to be 97 years old. My grandmother's still alive at 85. So yeah, I know these women, and they're wonderful. They're strong. They're great examples. And it's a shame that more young girls out there don't have these kind of examples in their lives.
Yeah, very much so. Something I'm very passionate about is making sure young women and girls know that these are options available to them. One of the most wonderful things that happened to me recently, it's going to sound very silly, but I went to visit a friend who is also a LARPer, and he's got a very young daughter. She's about 4 or 5, I think. And I think she may have seen a photo of me in some of my armor, and she wanted to be, in her words, a warrior princess like me. Now,
that's awesome.
The fact that it's not I want to be a princess, it's I want to be a warrior princess.
Yeah.
The fact that someone can look at a photo of a woman LARPing and say, you know what, that is inspirational. That's so important. And it sounds silly because it's only a game, but games can be opportunities for transformation. We learn through fun. From the very earliest childhood, that's how we learn. And I think as adults, we shouldn't forget that.
Yeah, my youngest is 5, and she wants to be a ninja. She's not playing around.
That's awesome. Wonderful.
Well, Kim, we are running out of time for the standard show here.
Okay.
So if you have anything we haven't covered yet, now would be a good time to do so and let people know where they can find you.
I'm not very easy to find, I must admit. I tend to keep myself quite quiet online. I have a Facebook account, but I only add friends. The best thing to do is just go out there and grab hold of some of my work and read it. So you can find the Tarot Illuminati or the Tarot Apokalipsis. I also worked on a tarot deck with the artist Nick Phillips called Sol Invictus, the God Tarot, which explores masculine divinity through the archetypes of the tarot, looking at mythology throughout the world. I also have a book called Tarot 101, Mastering the Art of Reading the Cards, which is published by Llewellyn, which is designed as a course in tarot, a course you can study at home. And it uses a very interesting approach, I think, to learning the cards. Rather than going through them one by one, I'll let you discover how it does it if you buy the book.
I highly recommend Tarot 101 to anyone who asks me how to get into tarot. It is one of 2 books I insist people buy.
Wonderful, thank you.
You're welcome.
Other than that, I don't really know what to say. I think a lot of what I have spoken about in this particular show has been, I've used the word evil a lot. It's not a word that usually comes out of my mouth because there's got to be something very special to be evil. But to me, it all boils down to the fact that we're not taking the advice of Bill and Ted enough. And that's that we need to be excellent to each other. If anything has come out of this, it's that we need to be excellent to each other. And that's what I'd like to leave it on.
I dig it. That's one of the best phrases that's ever entered my young mind. Mm-hmm. Be excellent to each other. That is correct.
Yes.
Well, Kim, thank you very much for being on the show. And for all you listeners out there, if you would like to hear the bonus interview questions with Kim, hearing us go through a little bit of morbid curiosity game, you can go to patreon.com/weirdwebradio. And remember, it's only $5 a month to sign up, and you'll get that bonus audio. Now, Kim, again, thank you. And everyone out there, go find her books, buy those tarot decks, and stay weird out there.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. It's been wonderful.
Okay, gang, that's a wrap on this episode of Weird Web Radio. Once again, thank you all for listening. Now, it's time for you to go join the official Weird Web Radio membership. Go to patreon.com/weirdwebradio and you can choose your rewards and become a member today. Enjoy all the exclusive benefits, inside information, and plenty of bonus audio with each guest. Now, you can find the show at weirdwebradio.com and weirdwebradio.libsyn.com. The show is listed on Facebook and Twitter as Weird Web Radio, and you can find me on Instagram as just Lonnie_Scott. Please remember to rate and comment and share the shows that you like. and it helps others find us in all the search results. Shoot me an email if you want to be a guest on the show, or if you know someone that would be a great guest in upcoming episodes. You can send that to weirdwebradio@gmail.com. Seek the mysteries and delights in life, my friends. As always, stay weird out there.